Let me begin with the US pivot to Asia. So the larger question is, has that pivot materialized finally with the appointment of several key diplomats in many countries in Southeast Asia, the Philippines, Indonesia? Robert Blake, who's a veteran Asia hand, is now being appointed as the ambassador to Indonesia. Are we finally seeing the US pivot to Asia take off, or has it already been in motion?
I think the pivot is in place. I mean, the truth is that the pivot was designed to send a message to friends of the United States in Asia and to China and India and other, all of our friends out here, that the United States was committed to the region, and we felt like we needed to call it a pivot because we were going to be drawing down our troops in Afghanistan,
right,
and we were leaving Iraq, and we didn't want anyone in Asia to think that the United States didn't have the wherewithal to sustain its presence here. So I would say that, the pivot's in very good shape. And so I think what the United States can and is doing is focus on economic engagement from a government perspective in Asia. And I think we see that with Mike Froman, who has left the White House and gone over to be the U.S. Trade Representatives. Right. And I'll tell you one thing. Froman would never have walked across the street from the White House and joined USTR unless the president, who is his good friend, had made a commitment to do trade in Asia, and specifically to give him the political capital to get a TPP, a Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, done and passed through Congress.
In terms of, so I just want to take that a little further.
Sure.
What is the United States specifically doing to involve the larger powers in the region, like India, China, within the ASEAN framework?
It's a very good question. China, of course, is eligible to join the TPP. India actually is not, because you're not a member of APEC. And this is one of the recommendations that we have made in my CSIS study called India-ASEAN Connectivity. We've recommended that to the U.S. government that we invite India to join APEC. Because if India joins APEC, it's eligible for the TPP.
Right.
The other move that the United States has to make is we have to join, we have to do an FTA with ASEAN, because that's the necessary condition to be part of the RCEP, which is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership.
What's standing in your way?
I actually think a lack of creativity on behalf of the U.S. government. Our U.S. Trade Representative's office is they're designed and congressionally mandated, I think you probably know. So whereas State Department and Defense can think strategically, USTR are trade negotiators mandated by a congressional authority. So their job is to negotiate trade agreements, not be strategic. And they want to get things done. So they'd like to be left alone and focus on TPP. What's needed is the president's intervention to say, look, we have to have an economic construct or a trade policy that fits with our geostrategic strategy.
Right. There's a fair bit of criticism that's emanating within India, that not just India but also the West, particularly the United States and the European Union, have moved too forward and too fast in engaging with the new regime without having any tangible results to show for it, at least for now. Especially on account of business or commercial initiatives in Burma, as well as military-to-military ties. I just want to focus first with you. Do you think the United States is moving too fast in re-establishing commercial ties with Myanmar?
No, I don't. I think I've spent a lot of time there. I've met with Aung San Suu Kyi, the president, the military, the 88 generation civil society. I think there's a consensus in Myanmar, and the United States would not have moved forward without talking to these different players, that political reform and economic reform are linked, and actually Myanmar, of all the Southeast Asian countries, is doing political reform ahead of economic reform, which is unique, and that to encourage that reform and the momentum of that reform, that we have to give an economic push or economic engagement, an economic dividend.
And has the U.S. got on board China and India with regard to its push in Myanmar?
Well, I think two things. One, I think the Chinese were shocked at Myanmar's decision to do the political reform. This is another example of what I've found. I think the Chinese have been brilliant in Southeast Asia for years, but up until 2009 when they drew the 9-dash line in
Right.
the South China Sea. Then their political risk analysis of Southeast Asia has been garbage, frankly. And I think Myanmar would be my first example where they didn't see it coming. They didn't understand that Tan Shui was serious about
Right.
the 7 steps to reform.
Right.
They didn't understand those factors. India, I think, is different. India has moved carefully, but they have moved to engage. And I think India's role in Myanmar is absolutely critical for linking Southeast Asia physically, that physical connectivity between South Asia and Southeast Asia.
Yeah. Let's wind up with one last question. In
Sure.
terms of big think,
Yeah.
what do you reckon would be one economic proposal that would really revolutionize the idea of the Indo-Pacific? Something that connects the ASEAN region, the United States, and the bigger powers in the continent. That would really take off this whole idea of not just the U.S. pivot, but also the whole concept of Indo-Pacific.
I think the United States, I think a lot about this. I think the United States has to do a free trade agreement with ASEAN.
Mhm.
We have to invite India to APEC, and then we should be full members of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP. RCEP is the right construct for leaders to drive economic engagement that has the same footprint as our strategic engagement, and I think that it allows economic engagement across the Indo-Pacific to be in the lead